Now, to begin with, we have to ask ourselves a very simple question. Why does a structure lose heat in the first place? Well, understand this. It's the nature of heat that heat goes to cold. Cold doesn't go to heat. Mother Nature really loves balance. Heat's going to flow from one object to another colder object until both objects are the same temperature. Heat goes to cold. Remember that. Heat goes to cold. Cold doesn't go to heat. That's why a structure loses heat and doesn't gain cold. There's heat inside the house and there's cold outside the house. Now, Mother Nature, of course, doesn't think that's fair, and she's going to try to even it up. Now, heat leaves a structure in a couple of different ways. One is what we call transmission or conductive heat loss. Now, as mentioned in the previous lesson, that's the heat loss through windows and doors, walls, the roof, etc. The heat in the air warms these surfaces up, and since it's cold on the other side of the window, door, or wall, the heat's going to conduct through that material to a colder surface on the other side. That heat's going to have to be replaced. Another way a building loses heat is air infiltration. That's when heated air leaks out of the building through all the little cracks and crevices, and then cold air is going to seep back in to replace it. The result of all of this is a flow of air through the house, with heat constantly being lost and colder air infiltrating to replace it. We've got to keep heating up that air to provide our customers with the comfort that they want and expect. Now, before we go on, get your paper and pencil, and I want you to write down what method you use to size a replacement boiler now. How did you figure it out the last time you did a job, or the last 5 jobs? No one's ever going to see this paper but you, so be honest. Just jot down some quick notes to yourself. Did you do a heat loss analysis? Do you look at the old boiler and simply match it, swap out same for same? Do you look at the old boiler and add a little fudge factor? All right, when we size a heating system, we have to think about the 2 different ways that we measure heat. One is intensity. We measure that in BTUs. It's the intensity of the heat we need. Does the boiler make the water in the system hot enough to provide enough heat? The second is quantity. We measure that in terms of BTUs per hour. It's that flow of air that we talked about, heat flowing to warm the cold air that infiltrates as warm air escapes or cools. Does the hydronic system have sufficient flow to overcome the flow of heat loss from the building? Again, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail later on. Getting the right size boiler is important. If the boiler is too small for the job, you can be on the wrong side of what we call the heat, no heat line. A boiler that's too small may be able to produce the intensity of the heat that the house requires, but it may be unlikely to deliver the quantity needed when it gets really, really cold out. Now, your customer expects comfort. You may be a little bit disappointed if the boiler is too small. When that happens, it looks so good. On the other hand, if you oversize the boiler, well, sure, you're going to get the heat intensity, and you're going to have the quantity that you want, but the boiler's not going to be efficient. It'll have a tendency to do what we call short cycle, and that's going to waste fuel. And you're not even going to come close to meeting your customers' expectations for fuel economy. When you do a proper heat loss analysis, however, you'll know how much heat that system has to deliver and how to size the boiler for proper efficiency and proper comfort as well. Now, one quick word about boiler sizing. When you go to choose a boiler based on your total heat loss for the building, you don't have to add a safety factor, really. A safety factor is already built into the data that we're going to be using, and it's also built into common boiler ratings, like those that boiler manufacturers put out, or the net IBR ratings, or the U.S. Department of Energy capacity ratings. Now, this applies equally to new systems or to replacement boilers. So, how did you size the replacement boiler on your last few jobs? What did you write down? Now, if you just match the capacity of the original boiler, or if you say that you measure the baseboard to get the installed heating load, you're making some assumptions that aren't serving you or your customer very well. First of all, you're assuming that the guy who put that boiler in 30 or 40 years ago knew what the heck he was doing. And second, you're also assuming that nothing has changed in the structure over the last 30 or 40 years since that boiler went in. A lot has changed in boilers since then. And the homeowner may have upgraded windows, may have added insulation, they may have added a room, you don't know, but you're assuming nothing's changed. In addition, measuring the amount of installed radiation does not reflect the heat loss of the structure. All that tells you is how much radiation was originally installed. You have no way of knowing whether the original installer did the math properly or whether he winged it and oversized. One more note. It's important to know that when it comes to a forced hot water system, the boiler does not have to be sized to support the installed radiation. It only has to be big enough to cover the calculated heating load of the building. A steam boiler, however, does have to be sized to support the installed radiation. A forced hot water boiler doesn't. The smart way to spec the boiler is to size it to overcome the heat loss of the structure. That way you're not guessing and you're not relying on how smart or how good the last guy happened to be. You're working with facts that allow you to size the boiler just right. And your customer's going to be happy and you're going to look good. That's why we're going to go on to the next lesson, so follow me.